Jesus told us his return will be like the days of Noah and the days of Lot. But what do we know about those days? Lot, who was Abraham's nephew, lived in Sodom, of Sodom and Gomorrah fame. What was life like there? What were the days of Lot like? In this video, we're going to first take a video tour of the physical remains that still exist of Sodom and Gomorrah and the evidence, biblical and scientific, that these are those remains. Second, we're going to examine the biblical account of a life of Lot, the days of Lot. Then third, we're going to examine the sins of Sodom that led to its destruction. And fourth, we'll apply what we've learned to make use of this in today's culture. So stick with us. This should be a fascinating video. Jesus' brother Jude had this to say about the cities. Notice the words of Jude that these cities are exhibited as an example. Presenting something as an exhibit means displaying it. Despite the fact that you may never have seen pictures of these modern remains of Sodom, they must be present if they are exhibited. In fact, both Peter and Jude tell us that the remains of these cities are left to us as examples for us to live godly lives. As our nation and our world continue to run toward the depravity of those ancient cities, we need to examine this teaching in depth. Now, the first question you may ask is, if these cities still exist, why haven't we heard about them on national news? Don't you think this would be one of the finds of the century? Well, they are. However, publicizing these finds would have the exact effect that God intended, for them to be examples to all of us of what lies ahead. In our politically correct secular culture, that doesn't fit with their narrative, so our TVs are silent about this amazing find. But the account of Lot does fit with our biblical narrative. Jesus, Peter, and Jude all mentioned Lot by name. These cities and the destruction of that area by fire and brimstone, I think it is clear that the account of Lot is a historic fact. Josephus, the first century historian, visited and saw the ruins of Sodom. There are still remainders of the divine fire, he said, and the traces of the 5 cities are still to be seen. Josephus in his Wars of the Jews. Obviously, the ruins were visible in the 1st century. These formations are found on the western edge of the Dead Sea, and they are a distinct lighter color than the surrounding rocks and sand as well. This color is even visible from the air, as can be seen in this picture. And the cities of the plain, Sodom, Gomorrah, and 3 other cities, are all still visible today. They were discovered by biblical archaeologist Ron Wyatt 30 years ago. Definitive remains of walls and towers and pyramids and even Sphinx are all still there. As we take this short video tour of these places, you can instantly see that what you are looking at are not naturally occurring formations. They are shaped with distinct right angles and even archways, windows and doors, and the walls display intricate dente formations at the tops, just like forts and castles have throughout time. And these formations are organized into streets. These definitely were man-made formations at one time. What you are looking at certainly appear to be made of rock, stone walls that once surrounded a city, but they're not. Notice the Apostle Peter tells us the cities were reduced to ashes. And if you were to touch these walls, that is exactly what you would discover. They are crumbly ash, the consistency of talcum powder. How could that be? The original walls were constructed out of limestone, which is prevalent in that area, but the cities were reduced to ash. God didn't cover them with ashes like Pompeii. He turned them into ashes. This is entirely consistent with the findings near the Dead Sea. The original walls were burned and the elements melted, just as Peter describes will happen in the future when God pours out fire and brimstone on the day of the Lord, which will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. How was this intense heat generated? Heat so hot that it could turn stone into ash. The biblical account tells us that fire and brimstone rained on the cities of the plain, and there is the clue. Brimstone is an Old English word for sulfur. Elemental sulfur burns at incredibly high temperatures, thousands of degrees hot. So hot, it burns blue-white, not yellow. So the very unusual formations have the appearance of weathered buildings, but are made of a salt-like formation. The salt itself is exactly what you would expect, given what happened there. The primary building material used at that time was limestone because it was easy to cut and work with. If limestone, calcium carbonate, is burned at high temperatures with sulfur, it produces a sulfurous carbonate material, which is exactly what this ash is made of. A very unusual ash. In fact, it is a fingerprint chemical compound for what happened there. And even more amazingly, embedded within the ash are round sulfur crystals, which is what you'd expect if sulfur rained down. This sulfur is in a form unlike any other sulfur found naturally on the earth. Sulfur only crystallizes in this form in the presence of very high heat. Again, this is entirely consistent with the biblical account. This sulfur is 95% pure, where normal elemental sulfur found elsewhere on Earth is only about 30% pure. Mixed in with the sulfur in these crystals were trace amounts of various metals that would cause the sulfur to burn even hotter than normal. The temperatures of a number of these igniting at once could reach 4,000 to 6,000 degrees, enough to melt or vaporize metals and stone. This is about the equivalent to the temperature on the surface of the sun. When Ron Wyatt took these crystals to a science lab to determine what the burning temperatures might be, the lab refused to test them because they were afraid it might destroy their ovens with the intense heat. The ash formations also exhibit wave-like layers that are also unique in this world. The extremely high burning temperatures of the sulfur metal mix caused thermal ionization, a process where electrons repel and attract, creating this swirling, melting effect in the rooms of Sodom. So in total, the remains on the western shore of the Dead Sea are exactly what one would expect from being literally melted by fire and brimstone. They are made out of sulfurous carbonate ash. They have embedded elemental sulfur within them, not found anywhere else on Earth, and they exhibit thermal ionization swirls. Can there be any doubt that these are the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah? Jesus explains how and when this will also occur in the future. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be just the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. This is the passage that mentions the days of Lot. In order to understand them, we need to go back to the beginning of his story. Lot traveled with his uncle Abraham from Ur of the Chaldeans in Iraq to Syria and then to the area that is now Israel. So Abraham was called of God to leave his homeland and go to a land God would show him. This was credited to Abraham as faith, and Lot followed him. This is a significant point. So if Abraham went up out of Iraq by faith, so did Lot. Lot made a lot of mistakes in his life, but we should give him credit for the acts of faith that he showed. In the land of Canaan, Lot and Abraham had herds and flocks, and we are told that the land could not sustain them both. This led to strife between the herdsmen of Lot and those of Abraham. So Abraham and Lot decided to take their flocks in separate directions. Abraham allowed Lot to choose which area of land, and Lot chose the luscious land, that of the Jordan Valley. Notice what this verse says about the land prior to the destructions of the cities of the plain. It was so lush, it was almost like the Garden of Eden. This region is currently among the most arid places on earth, and central to it is the Dead Sea. But notice what the passage says. Prior to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, it was well watered and like the Garden of Eden. Lot, however, was not content to simply graze his flocks in this area. In this verse, we see him gradually moving closer to Sodom, the infamous city. This mention of the wickedness of Sodom in connection with Lot's moving closer to the town is not accidental. Later, we see Lot will have moved out of his tent and into a house in the town. Lot was gradually becoming more comfortable living in this sinful area, and not necessarily as a minister to the people who lived there. Abraham was always needing to protect Lot. During the War of the Nine Kings, which was one of the earliest world wars, Sodom was plundered and Lot was taken captive. Even the righteous are punished if they are in proximity of the wicked. Abraham was informed Lot was a captive, and he and his men pursued the 4 kings who had captured him and defeated them in battle, freeing Lot. Sometime later, God and 2 of his angels visited Abraham to tell him that he and Sarah, his wife, were about to become parents of Isaac, the son of promise. And at that very same visit, the Lord said, "The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry." Genesis 18:20-21. God and Abraham then engage on a discussion of how many righteous people it would take for God to spare the region. It's almost as if Abraham is bargaining with the Lord to try and save Lot. He starts at 50, then 45, then 40, then 30, then 20, and finally 10. God told Abraham that if 10 righteous people remained, he wouldn't destroy the city. Of course, God did destroy the city, so we know that not even 10 righteous people lived there. However, we read God remembered Abraham and spared Lot and his daughters. The actual account of the destruction of Sodom is found in Genesis 19. The 2 angels who visited Abraham with God left and traveled to Sodom. Lot was sitting in the city gates and rose when the angels entered the city. Now, when they arrived, Lot was insistent that they stay at his house that night and not stay in the city square. Lot obviously knew what the inhabitants of Sodom were like. It was that evening that the men of Sodom surrounded the house and demanded the angels be brought out so they could rape them. Lot's insistence that the angels come into his house is an indication that he knew this was the likely way a new person was greeted by the men of Sodom, that raping strangers was their practice. Organized evil at a city level that the government either approved of or looked the other way at. What the men of Sodom said to Lot was instructive. This one came in as an alien, and already he is acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than we treat them. Genesis 19:9. Isn't this exactly what we hear in our society today? Sinners don't want to hear that what they are doing is wrong according to God's standards. They don't want anyone to judge their behaviors. Those were the days of Lot, and today is similar. The angels protected Lot by dragging him inside the house and blinding the crowd in the street outside. The angels then told Lot that they had come to destroy the city because of an outcry that had come before the Lord. Whose outcry was this? The Hebrew word taxaxah is the same Hebrew word used when the Israelite slaves cried out to the Lord in their slavery in Egypt. It is the cry of the oppressed. So this event with the angels was probably a regular occurrence in Sodom. Jesus tells us that the time before his return will be like the days of Lot. Is this type of sexual oppression something that is coming upon this world? Perhaps. In addition to being predators, God punished Sodom because their unwillingness to be generous with those less fortunate. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had arrogance, abundant food, and careless ease, but she did not help the poor and needy. Ezekiel 16:49. The prophet Jeremiah even accuses religious leaders of being like Sodom. Among the prophets of Jerusalem, I have seen a horrible thing, the committing of adultery and walking in falsehood. And they strengthen the hands of evildoers, so that no one has turned back from his wickedness. All of them have become to me like Sodom, and her inhabitants like Gomorrah. Many readers who don't share the sin of being a sexual predator feel insulated, but many do share these other sins of not being generous and strengthening the hands of evildoers by saying nothing. Many of us are not doing what we need to do to reconcile the culture to Christ and are being politically correct in looking the other way at sinners. God is no respecter of persons. It is not just the predator he views as Sodom. He views many of us that way as well. Lot then ran to warn the two young men who were pledged to marry his daughters. They were their fiancés, but these young men thought Lot was only joking when he said the city was about to be destroyed. Isn't that also typical of today's world, dismissing the coming judgment? Fire and brimstone preaching has gone out of style and has been replaced with a live for today, your best life now mentality in the church, but judgment is coming. And this type of teaching does a terrible disservice to churchgoers. The angels grabbed Lot, his wife, and his daughters by the hands and dragged them out of the city. And they escaped to a small town on the outskirts known as Zor, whose remains have also been found. But his wife turned back and was reduced to a pillar of salt. Jesus commented on this part of the account, Luke 17. He was insistent that on the day of judgment, when the angels come to rescue believers, no one must turn back. He warns believers to remember Lot's wife. So there must be the potential to not go with the angels. We know from Matthew 24:31 that Jesus sends angels to accomplish the rapture of his saints. Might some actually refuse to go? This is not something I completely understand, but Jesus' warning stands as a testimony that there must be some risk. If the angels come for you, but not your children or spouse, might there be those who love this world and them and want to stay? I'm not sure, but it certainly appears that some people will be given a choice of going in the rapture or not. After the righteous are protected, the wrath of God by fire and brimstone will be massive destruction, and it will take the world by complete surprise. They will be doing normal, earthly tasks of eating, drinking, buying, selling, marrying, building, planting, etc. Paul even tells us they will be saying peace and safety, right before this horrible destruction. In this previous video, we discussed how Jesus' discussion in Luke 17 about the flood in the days of Noah and Sodom in the days of Lot both require that Jesus returns prior to a single trumpet judgment from Revelation. Click the banner if you missed this crucial episode. Although knowing about prophecy is important, we need to be more than hearers of the word. We need to be doers. So what should we do with this information? First, we should praise God. Only the God of the Bible could accomplish what is seen on the plain of the Jordan River. But beyond this, Peter and Jude tell us these runes exist as examples for us. So how can we use them as examples? Certainly they should be examples for us personally to encourage us to live lives of holiness and thanksgiving before God. We also need to speak out against sin. Our society has rapidly deteriorated into a politically correct culture where speaking out against sin is looked down upon. Just like the inhabitants of Sodom, our world is saying for us not to judge their sin. Yet, as we just saw, God classifies those that empower the wicked as if they are Sodom themselves. Those who look the other way at sinners are grouped with them. As we stated before, fire and brimstone preaching has gone out of style. But discussing these findings of the remains of Sodom and Gomorrah with unbelievers, as well as with believers, is not out of the question. Unbelievers will immediately try to find natural explanations for the formations and chemical makeup of the examples left for us in the plain of the Jordan. But creating doubt about their worldview in their minds is a good thing. We plant seeds, and you never know which ones will fall on good soil and grow. Till next time, this is Nelson with the Gospel in the End Times.